At a family dinner, my brother looked at me and asked, "How's the new life in Portland?" I laughed. "What are you talking about?" My best friend Bethany choked on her water. "The $60,000 I sent Bethany for your escape?" I smiled, nervous and confused. "But Bethany told me you refused to help, that you didn't care if I stayed with Dakota." I forced myself to blink back the tears. His hands trembled as he pulled out his phone. "Didn't care. Emily, I've been sending $2,500 every month since that night you called me crying with a broken jaw." He scrolled frantically. Venmo receipts filled the screen. 24 payments worth $60,000 total. "I moved back with Mom and Dad," he whispered. "Sold my car. Lauren left me because I chose saving you over our wedding." When I turned to Bethany, my heart stopped. I knew that guilty look in her eyes. "She promised she'd get you out. She sent updates, said you kept backing out." He showed me screenshots of Bethany's texts. "She's not ready yet. Almost got her out today. Keep sending, I'll keep trying." Bethany's wine glass shattered on the floor. "You told me he wouldn't help," I whispered. The silence was deafening. "Emily, you don't understand," Bethany started. "Understand what?" I stood so fast my chair crashed backward. "That you watched him beat me unconscious and then comforted me saying, 'I wish your family cared'?" My hands shook as I pulled down my turtleneck. Purple fingerprints around my throat. This was from the last time I saw him. They still haven't healed. Bethany reached toward me. I don't." I jerked back. "You don't get to comfort me anymore." The words caught in my throat. "I tried to leave," I said, voice cracking. "Remember? You drove me to that apartment viewing. Said it fell through. Then another. Then another." Bethany stumbled backwards, searching for words that wouldn't come. "But you'd just panic. You'd change your mind anyway." "Because I had no money." The scream ripped from my chest. "I maxed 7 credit cards trying to escape." I yanked up my sleeve. Our matching Sisters by Choice tattoo mocked me in faded ink. My brother's voice was deadly quiet. "I created you a GoFundMe. It raised $4,000. And I sent that too." The room spun. "I lost my job because he found out about the remote work. You said no one would hire me anyway." "Your graduation," my brother choked out, angling himself towards my best friend. "You told me she didn't want me there." "I waited for you," I whispered. "Saved you a seat." The math hit me like a train. 2 years, 730 days. "Do you know what happened in those extra 730 days, Bethany?" She didn't answer. "I lost hearing in my left ear. See this?" I turned my head. He ruptured my eardrum because dinner was cold. My brother made a sound like a wounded animal. "I signed over Grandma's house to him, the inheritance, because we needed groceries, while you had $60,000 just sitting there. I was pregnant." The words fell like bombs. 5 months. "Your first niece." I looked at my brother. "I lost her after he threw me down the stairs." "You know what I was thinking about while I bled? How I couldn't afford the hospital." Bethany was crying now. Ugly, selfish tears. "But wait, it gets better." I laughed, high and hysterical. "The damage was too severe. I'm infertile now, forever, because I couldn't afford the follow-up surgery." Bethany took a step back, but I followed. The years of rage were finally breaking free. "You want to know the best part?" I stepped closer. "You were my maid of honor at the wedding he forced me into. You held my bouquet while I married my monster, knowing you had my escape in your bank account." Bethany screamed. "I deserve to be a mother more than someone who couldn't even leave." I paused, not understanding. "Bethany, where did the money go?" Her face went bright red, like she said something she shouldn't have. "Where's my $60,000, Bethany?" "I used it for IVF." The words burst out. The room went silent. Even the clock stopped ticking. My brother stood slowly. His whole body shook. "You stole her chance at children to buy your own?" He grabbed my hand, checking my pulse like I might disappear. "I used to have nightmares where I was at your funeral, and everyone kept asking why I didn't help. Now it feels like it just came true." "Pack your things," he said firmly. "Tonight." "You didn't just steal money," I said quietly. "You stole my family from me. I thought Derek abandoned me." "You stole that." Derek was already on another call. I didn't know it at the time, but Derek was about to make my parents pay. Me and Bethany's lives were about to change forever, for better and for worse. Derek walked straight to my bedroom closet and yanked out the duffel bag I'd hidden behind old winter coats, the one I'd packed and unpacked a dozen times over the past year whenever I thought I might actually leave. His phone was already pressed to his ear, and I heard Dad's voice answer on the other end before Derek cut him off with words so cold they made me flinch. "You're going to listen for once in your life." He walked into the bathroom and shut the door, but I could still hear his muffled voice getting louder with each word, while Bethany sat frozen on my living room floor, mascara running down her face in thick black streaks. My hands shook as I grabbed the plastic grocery bag from under the sink and started throwing in my medications from the bathroom counter, the anxiety pills and painkillers and antibiotics from the last time Dakota hurt me bad enough to need them. The orange bottles clattered against each other as I dropped them twice, trying to get them all in the bag, then remembered my phone charger and had to crawl under the bed to unplug it from the wall. Derek came back out with his jaw clenched so tight I could see the muscle jumping, and he picked up my duffel bag with one hand and grabbed the grocery bag from me with the other. "We're leaving now." His voice was flat and hard like I'd never heard it before. "Mom and Dad will deal with her until the police get here." He nodded toward Bethany, who was still on the floor making these weird gasping sounds like she couldn't catch her breath. I followed Derek out the door without looking back at her, my legs feeling like jelly as we walked down the 3 flights of stairs to his car parked on the street. The second I sat down in the passenger seat, my whole body started shaking so hard my teeth were chattering, even though Derek cranked the heat up all the way and pointed every vent toward me. He drove fast but careful, checking the mirrors every few seconds like he expected Dakota to appear behind us any second. "We're going to a motel first," he said after about 20 minutes of driving through back roads I didn't recognize. "It's safer than going straight to Mom and Dad's in case he comes looking for you there." The thought of Dakota looking for me made my stomach lurch, and I realized I hadn't even thought about him finding out I was gone until right that second. Derek pulled into a rundown motel with half the neon sign burned out and parked near the office, telling me to stay in the car with the doors locked while he went inside. I watched him through the window as he paid the clerk in cash, not using a credit card that could be traced, and came back with 2 room keys. He drove us around to the back of the building and parked right in front of rooms 23 and 24, grabbing our bags and checking around the parking lot before letting me get out. The rooms were connected by an inner door that he immediately unlocked and propped open, then went through both rooms checking the windows and testing the deadbolts on both outer doors. "I'm not leaving you alone tonight," he said, sitting down on the bed across from where I'd collapsed on the other one. That's when everything hit me all at once and I started sobbing so hard I couldn't breathe. These huge gasping sobs that felt like they were ripping me apart from the inside. Derek moved over and just held me while I fell completely apart, not saying anything, just letting me cry until I didn't have any tears left, and my whole body felt empty and wrung out like a dish rag. I must have fallen asleep at some point because when I woke up it was morning, and Derek was sitting in the chair by the window with his phone in his hand. "There's a number here for a domestic violence hotline," he said quietly when he saw I was awake. "I think we should call them." My hands were still shaking when I took the phone and dialed the number, listening to it ring 3 times before a woman's voice answered, calm and steady like she'd done this 1,000 times before. "My name is Jocelyn Reeves," she said after I stumbled through trying to explain why I was calling. "I can meet you at the courthouse today to help you file for an emergency protection order if you're ready." I told her yes, even though I wasn't sure I was ready for anything, and she gave us directions to meet her at the courthouse at 10 o'clock. Derek drove us there in silence, and I saw Jocelyn waiting by the metal detectors, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes who took my arm gently and led us to a small office on the 3rd floor. She helped me fill out all the forms while Derek pulled up photos on his phone that he'd screenshot from our video calls over the past 2 years, pictures of my black eyes, and split lips and bruised arms that he'd been keeping as evidence without telling me. The judge was an older woman who looked at everything carefully, studying each photo and reading my statement twice before signing the temporary restraining order against Dakota. "This is valid for 2 weeks until your hearing," she explained, but I knew it was just paper, and paper couldn't actually stop him if he really wanted to find me. Derek drove us straight from the courthouse to an urgent care clinic where the doctor, a young woman with gentle hands, took photographs of the purple fingerprints around my throat and documented every cut and bruise on my arms and legs. I wonder what Derek's really saying to their parents behind that bathroom door while Emily's packing. There's something about how cold his voice got that makes me think this family dynamic runs deeper than we're seeing right now. She gave me a referral to see an ENT specialist about my damaged ear, writing notes in my chart about the hearing loss I'd been hiding for months. That evening, Derek called our parents again and put them on speaker, so I could hear Mom crying on the other end. "We're getting Bethany out of the apartment," she said between sobs. She admitted everything about the money, all of it. Dad's voice came through next, and he sounded more angry than concerned when he said they'd do whatever it took to help now, like he was mad about having to deal with this mess more than worried about me. Later that night, Jocelyn called to check on me and discuss what would happen next. "I think you should stay with family rather than go to a shelter if that's a safe option," she said. We agreed I'd go to my parents' house the next day, but only with new locks on all the doors, and their security system turned on, and nobody allowed to visit without checking who it was first. "Derek will stay there too," I told her, and she said that was good, that having someone else there would help. The drive to my parents' house the next morning felt like traveling back in time, passing all the familiar streets and stores from when I was growing up, before Dakota, before everything went wrong. Mom had already changed the locks and gave us new keys, and Dad had activated their security system that they'd never bothered using before. My childhood bedroom looked exactly the same as when I'd left it years ago. The same purple walls and boy band posters and stuffed animals on the shelf like a museum of who I used to be. That first night, I woke up 4 times thinking I heard Dakota in the house, my heart racing and sweat soaking through my shirt, even though Derek had dragged an air mattress into my room and was sleeping right by the door. The familiar wallpaper with its tiny flowers seemed to belong to some other girl's life, someone who hadn't been broken into pieces and put back together wrong. 3 days later, Detective Winnie Guzman knocked on my parents' door at 9 in the morning. She was older than I expected, with gray streaks in her hair and tired eyes that had seen too much. Derek sat next to me on the couch while she pulled out her phone to record everything. She asked me to start from the beginning with Dakota, and I talked for 2 hours straight. My voice cracked when I described the beatings and the lost baby and signing over Grandma's house. She wrote notes while I talked and asked specific questions about dates and hospital visits. Then she wanted to know about Bethany and the money, and Derek pulled up all the screenshots on his phone. He showed her every Venmo payment and every text where Bethany lied about me backing out. The detective scrolled through everything slowly and took pictures of his phone screen with her own phone. She said the DA would review everything for possible fraud charges against Bethany. Before she left, she gave me her card and said to call if I remembered anything else. That afternoon, Jocelyn called and said she found a civil attorney named Alistair Bowen who wanted to meet with us. His office was downtown in a building with marble floors, and I felt out of place in my old sweatshirt. Alistair was younger than I thought lawyers would be, with thick glasses and papers everywhere on his desk. He listened to the whole story without interrupting, then explained we had a strong case for theft and fraud. He said I could sue for the full $60,000 plus extra damages for being trapped longer with Dakota. The legal terms made my head spin, but he broke it down simply. Bethany took money meant for me under false pretenses, which was fraud and conversion. He pulled out a stack of papers for me to sign to officially hire him as my lawyer. His fee would come from whatever we recovered, so I wouldn't owe anything up front. I signed everything with shaking hands while Derek read through each page carefully. That night, I couldn't sleep, so I started going through my old emails on my laptop. Something felt wrong about how I never saw Derek's messages about the GoFundMe he mentioned. I searched for his email address and found dozens of messages in my spam folder somehow. But when I looked closer, I saw someone had created email filters to automatically delete anything from Derek. The filters were dated 2 years ago, right when he started sending money to Bethany. My stomach dropped when I realized Bethany must have gotten into my email account somehow. She knew my passwords because we used to share everything like sisters do. I found the GoFundMe link Derek had sent with pictures of my bruised face and his plea for help. $4,000 from strangers who wanted to help me escape, and I never even knew it existed. The betrayal hit me all over again, and I threw up in the bathroom sink. Derek heard me and came to check, and I showed him what I found on the laptop. His face went white when he saw the email filters, and he started pulling up his own phone. He had saved every text conversation with Bethany for the past 2 years in a folder. He showed me message after message where she controlled his access to me completely. She told him I didn't want him at my graduation because I was too ashamed to see him. She said I refused to come to holidays because I couldn't face the family after marrying Dakota. Every single lie was perfectly crafted to keep us apart while she played the supportive best friend. She even sent him fake updates about trying to get me out with specific details about apartment viewings. Meanwhile, she was telling me Derek abandoned me and didn't care if I lived or died. The manipulation was so calculated it made me physically sick to read through everything. 2 days later, Alistair called to say he was sending official legal letters to preserve evidence. He sent one to Venmo requiring them to keep all records of Derek's payments to Bethany. He sent another to GoFundMe to preserve the fundraiser Derek created and all donation records. Then he sent a demand letter directly directly to Bethany, requiring her to maintain all bank records about the money. She had 30 days to respond, or we would file the lawsuit and make everything public. My parents called that night asking for a family meeting, and we drove over the next morning. Mom had been crying, and her eyes were red and puffy when she opened the door. She sat us down in the living room and admitted she suspected something was wrong with Dakota. She said she saw the bruises at Thanksgiving but didn't want to interfere in my marriage. Dad got defensive immediately and started complaining about the legal mess we were creating with Bethany. He said lawsuits would just drag everything out and make our family look bad in town. But he agreed to support me even though his voice sounded more annoyed than caring. The conversation went in circles with Mom crying and Dad getting frustrated about money and reputation. I left feeling more alone than before, even though they said they wanted to help. The next week, I finally saw the ENT specialist about my ear, and she did a bunch of tests. She confirmed what I already knew about permanent hearing loss from the ruptured eardrum. She said the damage was too old to repair surgically and scheduled me for a hearing aid fitting. I would need to wear one for the rest of my life and replace it every few years. Another thing Dakota stole from me that I could never get back no matter what happened legally. Jocelyn called that afternoon and asked if I wanted to attend a support group for abuse survivors. I didn't want to go, but Derek said it might help, so I agreed to try once. The meeting was in a church basement with folding chairs in a circle and terrible coffee. There were 8 other women there, and they all had different stories but the same broken look. One woman's sister stole her inheritance while she was in the hospital after her husband's attack. Another woman's best friend sabotaged all her job applications to keep her dependent and trapped. Hearing their stories made me realize betrayal comes in so many forms, but the pain feels the same. I didn't talk that first meeting, but I listened to everything and cried quietly in my chair. 2 weeks after the restraining order, Dakota started calling from different numbers, leaving voicemails. He would cry and apologize, then get angry and threaten to find me wherever I was hiding. Derek helped me document every call, and we went to the police station to file a report. The officer said they would arrest Dakota if he kept violating the order, but I knew that wouldn't stop him. We changed my phone number that day and only gave it to necessary people like lawyers. 3 weeks after sending the demand letter, Alistair got a response from Bethany's lawyer. The letter said she couldn't pay back the money because she was $80,000 in debt from failed IVF cycles. They claimed the money was a gift from Derek to help her have a baby, not theft. Reading that made me so angry I actually threw my phone across the room and cracked the screen. The audacity of claiming my escape money was a gift made me physically sick with rage. Alistair called the next morning and asked me to come to his office to review our strategy. Derek drove me there and we sat in the conference room while Alistair spread out printed screenshots of all Bethany's texts to Derek. He pointed to specific messages where she told Derek I was backing out, that I wasn't ready, that I kept changing my mind. Then he showed bank records proving she deposited Derek's money the same days she sent those lies. He explained that this pattern showed clear intent to deceive, and that we could prove she knew exactly what she was doing when she took the money. The legal terms made my head spin, but the basic idea was simple enough. Bethany lied to get money that wasn't hers, and we had proof. Alistair said judges hate this kind of betrayal, and we had a strong case for getting every penny back plus damages. Bethany's lawyer claiming those payments were gifts for IVF makes me wonder how long she's been planning this defense. The timing of those email filters 2 years ago, right when Derek started sending money, seems way too convenient to be coincidence. While he talked, I kept seeing flashes of my wedding day 2 years ago. Bethany had been there at 6 in the morning to help me get ready. She curled my hair and fixed my veil when my hands shook too much to pin it right. She held my bouquet at the altar while I said vows to Dakota that made me want to throw up. She gave a maid of honor speech about true love and finding your person, all while $60,000 sat in her bank account. The memory made me so angry I had to excuse myself to the bathroom where I dry heaved over the toilet. When I came back, Derek was on the phone with our parents asking about help with an apartment. I heard Dad's voice through the speaker complaining about how much everything costs. Mom took the phone and said they would help, but I had to promise to get therapy and get my life together. They wanted receipts for everything and weekly check-ins about my progress. Derek's jaw tightened, but he agreed to their terms because we both knew I had no other options. That afternoon, Jocelyn called about a data entry job one of her contacts needed filled. It was boring work typing numbers into spreadsheets, but I could do it from anywhere with internet. The pay was barely enough for food and basic bills, but having any income felt huge. I filled out the application that night and got approved 2 days later. My first week I made $300, and when the deposit hit my account, I sat on Derek's couch crying with relief. Detective Guzman called while I was working on spreadsheets the next week. She said the district attorney reviewed my case and decided to file assault charges against Dakota. There would be a preliminary hearing in 3 weeks where I'd have to testify about the abuse. My whole body went cold at the thought of seeing him again. She said I could request screens so I wouldn't have to look at him directly, but I'd still be in the same room. I agreed to testify even though the idea made me want to run away and never come back. Meanwhile, Bethany started posting weird stuff on social media about being betrayed and how only real friends understand fertility struggles. Our mutual friends started texting me asking what happened between us. I kept my answers short, just saying we had a falling out and leaving it at that. Derek wanted me to post the truth about what she did, but I was too tired to deal with the drama. I had my first appointment with Catherine Walsh 3 days before the criminal hearing. She specialized in trauma and didn't push me to forgive anyone or move on like other therapists I'd tried. Instead, she helped me make a safety plan for the hearing and taught me breathing exercises for when I felt panic rising. We talked about small goals like eating 3 meals a day and taking showers regularly. She said healing wasn't linear and some days would be harder than others. Insurance covered part of the sessions, but I still had to pay $40 each time, which ate into my food budget. A week later, Alistair called with news that made me see red all over again. Through discovery, he got Bethany's full bank records showing where the money went. Yes, she spent thousands on IVF treatments, but she also bought plane tickets to Hawaii, put $8,000 down on a new car, and had charges at expensive stores almost every week. While I was getting my eardrum ruptured and losing my baby, she was shopping at Nordstrom with my escape money. Alistair said this would help our case because it showed she didn't even use all the money for fertility treatments like she claimed. We officially filed the lawsuit the next Monday. Alistair warned me that court records are public and people might find out about everything that happened. I thought about all the shame and secrets I'd been carrying and decided I didn't care anymore. Let people know what Bethany did and what I survived. At least the truth would be out there instead of her lies. That same night, Derek showed me his phone where where he'd texted his ex Lauren to apologize for choosing to help me over their wedding. Her response was kind, but clear that they were done forever. She said some choices change everything, and can't be undone no matter how sorry you are. Derek's eyes were red when he showed me, and we both sat there crying about everything he lost, trying to save me, while Bethany stole that chance away. 3 days later, Mom called another family meeting, and I could tell from her voice something was wrong. Dad sat at the kitchen table with his hands folded while Mom paced back and forth near the window. Derek arrived late and took the seat next to me without saying anything. Mom finally stopped pacing and looked right at me. "We need to tell you something about Bethany." My stomach dropped because I knew this wasn't going to be good. Dad cleared his throat and started talking about how Bethany had called them 2 years ago, worried about me. She'd told them about the bruises and asked what she should do. Mom's voice cracked when she admitted they told Bethany to handle it herself because they didn't want to get involved in my personal business. They gave her permission to manage the whole situation instead of stepping in themselves. The room went cold, and I felt like I couldn't breathe. Derek slammed his fist on the table so hard the salt shaker fell over. "You told her to handle it?" His voice was deadly quiet. Dad tried to explain they thought it would be better coming from a friend, but Derek wasn't having it. I stood up and walked out without saying anything because if I opened my mouth, I'd scream. The restraining order hearing happened 2 weeks later at the courthouse downtown. I wore my only nice outfit and sat behind the prosecutor while Dakota sat on the other side with his lawyer. The judge reviewed all the violations we'd documented, including the phone calls and texts, despite the temporary order. Dakota's lawyer tried to argue they were just attempts to reconcile, but the judge wasn't buying it. She looked through the evidence folder with all the photos of my injuries and the police reports. After 20 minutes, she granted a 2-year protection order requiring Dakota to stay 500 feet away from me at all times. He had to surrender his guns to the sheriff within 48 hours. The judge warned him that any violation would result in immediate arrest. It was just a piece of paper, but at least now it had real consequences attached. Walking out of the courthouse, I felt a tiny bit safer, even though I knew paper couldn't really stop him if he wanted to hurt me again. Alistair called the next morning saying Bethany's lawyer wanted to meet about a settlement. We met at his office that afternoon where her lawyer laid out the offer on official letterhead. She would pay back $30,000 over 10 years if I signed an NDA agreeing never to discuss what happened publicly. The lawyer said this was generous considering Bethany's financial situation. Alistair leaned back in his chair and told them it was insulting to offer half the stolen amount, plus demand silence about it. I looked at the paper with all its legal language and pushed it back across the table. No deal. The lawyer seemed surprised and started explaining how I'd get nothing if we went to trial, but I didn't care. I wasn't going to let Bethany buy my silence for half of what she stole. At support group that week, the room split down the middle about my decision. Some women thought I was being stupid, turning down guaranteed money when I desperately needed it. Others said standing my ground was the right thing, even if it meant getting nothing in the end. One woman who'd been coming for 3 years said her sister stole her inheritance, and she took a settlement with an NDA, but regretted it every day because she couldn't warn other people. The facilitator reminded us there's no right way to seek justice, and everyone has to make their own choice. I sat there listening to everyone's opinions and realized how much Bethany's betrayal had messed up my ability to trust anyone's motives anymore. Even these women trying to help made me wonder what they really wanted from me. The fertility specialist appointment came 2 weeks later at the women's clinic across town. She reviewed all my medical records from the miscarriage and did an exam that hurt more than I expected. After running some tests, she sat down and confirmed what the hospital had already told me. The damage from the untreated miscarriage was too severe, and I'd never be able to carry a pregnancy. She talked about other options like adoption or using a surrogate, but I couldn't even process that information. Walking out to my car, I felt hollow, but also weirdly relieved to know for certain instead of wondering. There was no maybe anymore, just a definite never. I sat in the parking lot for an hour before I could drive home. My parents finally agreed to help with an apartment deposit after I showed them 3 rejection letters from cheaper places that turned me down for bad credit. Mom wrote the check while making comments about being more responsible with money in the future. The landlord at the 4th place almost rejected me too when he ran my credit, but Derek offered to co-sign the lease. After 2 hours of paperwork and background checks, I got the keys to a tiny studio apartment on the 3rd floor of an old building. It was 300 square feet with a kitchenette and a bathroom so small you could touch both walls at once, but it was mine. Moving day came a week later, and everything I owned fit in Derek's car with room to spare. He helped me carry up 2 boxes of clothes and a bag of kitchen stuff Mom had given me. Derek installed new deadbolts on the door and set up a doorbell camera that sent alerts to my phone. Mom showed up with grocery bags and some old sheets from their linen closet. That first night alone, I checked the lock 6 times and jumped at every noise in the hallway. But I also slept better than I had in months, knowing Dakota didn't have a key to this door. Derek's ex Lauren saying some choices can't be undone makes me curious about what she's really feeling beneath that polite response. There's something deeper in how she phrased that. 2 weeks into living alone, I got a call from Detective Guzman saying Dakota had been caught on my parents' security camera driving by their house 3 times in one night. We filed another violation report and had to go back to court where the judge was clearly angry. She told Dakota's lawyer that his client was testing her patience and next time would mean jail time, not just warnings. I bought more locks for my windows and started varying my route to work, but refused to live, scared all the time. Good news finally came when Alistair called saying the court had frozen $15,000 of Bethany's assets while our lawsuit was pending. Her lawyer filed an emergency motion claiming this created severe financial hardship for his client. The judge reviewed the motion and noted that Bethany hadn't worried about hardship when she was spending stolen money meant for domestic violence escape. The freeze would stay in place until the case was resolved. It was a small victory, but the first real consequence Bethany had faced for what she did. A week later, I found a thick envelope in my mailbox with Bethany's handwriting on it. Inside was a 3-page letter where she tried to explain herself without really apologizing. She wrote about being jealous of my relationship with Derek since we were kids and how desperate she was to have a baby. She said the debt from failed IVF treatments made her convince herself she deserved the money more than someone who kept choosing to stay with their abuser. There was no real sorry anywhere in the letter, just explanations and excuses that changed nothing about what she'd done. 3 weeks later, Catherine handed me a yellow legal pad in her office and told me to write everything I needed from my parents. My hands shook as I wrote that they had to admit they failed to protect me and stop acting like what happened wasn't that bad. I wrote that they couldn't blame me for the legal stuff with Bethany or make me feel guilty sketchy about needing their help. Catherine read it over and helped me make it clearer without softening the message. I folded the letter into an envelope and dropped it in the mailbox outside her building, even though I knew they might never talk to me again. 2 days later, Mom called saying they'd do family therapy if that's what it took to fix things. Our first session was awkward with all 4 of us crammed into the therapist's small office. Mom kept wiping her eyes and saying she was sorry without making excuses about not knowing how bad things were. Dad sat with his arms crossed and kept checking his watch, but at least he showed up. The therapist said healing would take time and there was potential if everyone stayed committed. I nodded, but didn't really believe things would get better between us. That weekend, I spread all the hospital papers from my miscarriage across Derek's kitchen table. Each receipt and discharge form and test result made my chest tight, but I sorted them into neat piles by date. Derek helped me scan everything into his computer and make backup copies on a flash drive. Alistair said having everything organized would help our case against Bethany. The mediation happened in a conference room downtown with lawyers on both sides of a long table. Bethany wouldn't look at me while her lawyer argued she couldn't pay back the full amount. After 4 hours of back and forth, she agreed to pay $60,000 over 15 years with no NDA, so I could talk about what she did. She also had to do 200 hours at a domestic violence shelter and keep paying no matter what happened with her finances. It wasn't perfect, but seeing her sign those papers admitting she stole from me felt like something. A week later, Detective Guzman called about Dakota's case moving forward. The DA offered him 3 years probation with a batterer program and permanent restraining order instead of trial. If he messed up during probation, he'd serve 2 years in prison. I thought about it for 3 days before agreeing, because I couldn't handle telling everything again in a public trial. At the plea hearing, I stood at the podium reading my victim impact statement about the permanent hearing loss and infertility. Dakota stared at the table the whole time, never looking up once. The judge accepted the plea and gave him the sentence while I gripped Derek's hand so hard my knuckles went white. Walking out of the courthouse, I felt empty, but also like a weight had lifted off my shoulders. The next morning, I got a call from a company about the customer service application I'd sent weeks ago. The hiring manager asked about the gap in my work history, and I told her the truth about leaving an abusive situation. She said she was a survivor too and believed in second chances. They offered me full-time remote work with health insurance starting next month. I cried after hanging up because it was the first good news in so long. At our next family therapy session, Dad finally looked at me instead of the wall. He said he was scared of confrontation and chose to ignore what was happening instead of protecting me. My parents agreed to pay for my therapy and medical bills from my injuries. The therapist said it was progress, even if our relationship would never be the same as before. With insurance starting soon, I made appointments to see about surgery for the internal scarring from the miscarriage. The doctor examined me and said surgery wouldn't fix the fertility damage but might help with the constant pain I'd been having. I scheduled it for next month and tried not to think about how much recovery would cost. The surgery took longer than expected, but the doctor said it went well. I woke up feeling like my insides were on fire, and the pain meds made me throw up. 3 days later, my temperature spiked and the incision started leaking yellow fluid. The emergency room doctor said I had an infection and needed IV antibiotics for a week. I had to call my new job and explain why I'd missed training. The manager was understanding, but I could tell I'd already used up her patience before even starting properly. The antibiotics made me so tired I could barely stay awake for the online training modules. Derek had to loan me $800 for the hospital bills that insurance didn't cover. Mom said they couldn't afford both my therapy and these surprise medical costs, so I'd have to figure something out. I stared at the pile of bills on my kitchen counter, wondering if I'd ever stop drowning in debt from what Dakota and Bethany did to me. 2 weeks later, Alistair called while I was sorting through medical bills at my kitchen table. He said Bethany's first payment bounced and her lawyer just sent notice she was filing for bankruptcy. My hands went numb holding the phone as he explained bankruptcy could wipe out the whole debt if the court allowed it. He filed an emergency motion right away arguing fraud debts can't be discharged, but warned me the legal fight could take years. The retainer alone would cost another $5,000 I didn't have. I stared at the $60,000 settlement papers that might become worthless and had to decide if I should keep fighting or just accept I'd never see the money. 3 days later, Detective Guzman called about Dakota getting arrested for drunk driving with a blood alcohol 3 times the legal limit. Since it happened during his probation, the prison sentence kicked in automatically, and he'd serve 2 years starting immediately. Part of me felt safer knowing he was locked up, but that same afternoon, his mom started leaving voicemails calling me a vindictive bitch. His brother sent Facebook messages saying I ruined Dakota's life and deserved everything that happened to me. The police said the threats weren't specific enough to do anything about, so I spent money I didn't have on more security cameras for my apartment door. My hearing aid finally arrived, but insurance only covered the cheapest model that whistled with feedback every time I turned my head. The audiologist adjusted it 3 times, but said the basic model just did that sometimes. During work calls, the feedback got so bad, I'd have to mute myself and pretend my internet was cutting out. She told me I'd need to replace it every few years at $3,000 each time, which made my stomach drop. Derek started bringing his new girlfriend Amy to family dinners, and she kept asking why he was so involved in helping his adult sister. He missed our next 2 therapy sessions, and when I confronted him, he finally admitted he resented losing Lauren and his savings because of me. We screamed at each other in Mom's driveway until we both cried and hugged, but something felt broken between us after that. 6 months into the payment plan, Bethany had only made 2 payments before claiming hardship from new IVF treatments costing $15,000. The court modified her payment schedule, stretching it to 20 years, which meant I'd be 53 when it finished if she even kept paying. Alistair said I should mentally write off the money to move forward, but the injustice burned in my chest every night. My apartment building sold to a developer who sent notices raising rent 40%, which was legal with 60 days notice in our state. Even with my full-time job, I couldn't afford the new rate, and my credit was too damaged from medical debt to qualify anywhere decent. Mom offered to let me move back home, but with rules about being home by 10 and getting my life together, that made me feel like a teenager. At what became my last support group meeting, I looked around and recognized the same faces from a year ago, still telling the same stories. Some women had moved on with their lives, while others like me seemed stuck between who we were and who we wanted to be. The facilitator asked if I wanted to share, but I just shook my head and never went back. A year after leaving Dakota, I sat at my kitchen table with bankruptcy papers spread out next to past due medical bills totaling $48,000. The lawyer explained I could keep my car and basic stuff, but any money from Bethany's lawsuit would go to creditors first anyway. I signed my name on each each form, knowing it meant 7 more years of ruined credit on top of everything else. At least this time it was my choice, even though I wondered if there was really any difference between Dakota's cage and this new one made of poverty and damaged credit. Thanks for sticking with me through all of this today. It's definitely been quite a journey to share together. Catch you next time, and hey, subscribe for more content like this.